Yeah, no, it's going. It's going. All right. Okay, hello everyone. We are now starting the next panel. The panel is entitled Local Reparation Struggles. And so our panelists will be speaking on that subject. So first of all, just in case you don't know me, my name is Kane Jordan, and I am one of the co-founders of the Reparations at UChicago Working Group. So now we're going to sort of go down the line. Cool. Okay. So first up we have Kofi Ademola from Black Lives Matter.
Quick intro.
No, you're gonna speak.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Excuse my voice. I'm just getting over sickness, so I don't quite have my voice back yet. But in this space, I'm actually just kind of representing residents. So I live in Woodlawn. I've been a homeowner in Woodlawn for over 10 years now. Prior to living in Woodlawn, I have experienced community organizing in Woodlawn. When I was a teenager, I used to be with an organization called Chicago Alliance for Neighborhood Safety. And I was in AmeriCorps Vista doing community organizing in the Parkway Gardens and throughout the corridor of Cottage Grove. So a lot of the work I did was around public safety. So I have a long history with Woodlawn. It has a special place in my heart. And that was part of my motivation to actually moving into this community, being a part of the community. So it has a special stake for me, and learning about the history and then sort of the relationships with the university and Chicago politics from both Daley administrations up into Rahm Emanuel's current administration, and then the history of the older people that have been in office. We've had basically 3 or more, and Joan can correct me on this if I'm wrong, all the people that have been indicted on some type of level for corruption, including my current alderperson, Willie Cochran, who is currently probably going to go and spend some Fed time for exploiting and extorting businesses. So with that being said, it is by no means a surprise for me to understand the ways in which this university has disenfranchised my community, profited off my community, and displaced people out of my community. Just more recently, in 2016, I believe the average rent was about $700, and the average household income was about $27,000 a year. Currently, the average rent is between $900 and $1,000. So in such a short amount of time, we've seen an increase in rent and therefore pushing people out of community. What we haven't seen an increase in is investment. So we haven't seen new businesses open up. We haven't seen new job opportunities kind of come out of that. With the speculation with the Obama Center coming in, I've seen the community around me transform. So I'm right on 64th and Dorchester, and where I live, I used to have a community garden between 2012 and about 2016 or so. And we knew at the time that the developer had owned that land. They had just been sitting on the land. It was vacant. They weren't doing anything with them. So we were like, yo, can we start a garden here? They were like, cool, just know that at some point, we may have to uproot the garden. We're like, yeah, it's understandable. So come around 2016, 2017, the developers reached out to us and were like, yeah, we're going to start working on it. And we're like, okay, so, we had to take our whole garden down or whatever. In less than a year, they developed 2 houses on our corner that are now both worth over $500,000. So you know, as a homeowner, right? It's like, oh, you know, great, property's being built. You know, I got to worry about property tax going up, but also, you know, property value potentially rising. But it's not about that per se. It's about people that, again, can't afford, you know, to keep up the property tax, that can't afford the rising in rent. And I'm seeing a lot of spaces transform, new condominiums being built, but also still being juxtaposed to the vacant lots in the community, abandoned buildings. And then if you go further east towards Cottage Grove and King Drive, you still see a lot of undeveloped community. And then you not even go 5 blocks down and it's pristine and it's beautiful and it's highly developed as you get closer to the university. So, you know, I just wanted to bring those sort of personal experiences when we have this conversation around reparations and the roles that the university plays. I love the fact that, you know, we learned about Stephen A. Douglas and the, you know, the long legacy of money being invested from slavery to even make this institution come to fruition. And as we know, a lot of institutions have those same similar origin stories, right? But also, you know, you look at the Rockefeller money and you look at, you know, just the robber barons in general, that too has to be taken into account because, again, you know, the reason why A. Philip Randolph and other people organized around black labor is because, you know, folks like the robber barons and the industrial de-evolution, as I like to call it, were exploiting black and brown people in particular as they were exploiting other immigrant groups. And even though they were somewhat compensated for that labor, it was still exploited labor. And it was still a university, you know, profiting off of getting money from donors like the Rockefellers, right? So that more recent history is important. And as the one brother, Elder, brought up earlier in the conversation about someone being from the university that was, you know, a part of, I forgot he was talking about like a think tank or something connected to World War II. But my point being is, again, this university having a history of proliferating imperialism, capitalism, and neoliberal policies. So to me, these are all these different things make this university culpable and complicit, and not only just the broader exploitation, but the very targeted exploitation of the very community that it's rooted in. And, you know, when this community changed, you know, within the 50s and 60s, and it became more predominantly black, but in the population sort of decreased, again, the university saw opportunity in that. So, yeah. So this, to me, it is absolutely beholden and responsible and accountable to play a role in repairing a lot of the harms that have happened to residents in this community, as well as the descendants of the slaves that were abused by Douglas and the workers that were exploited by Rockefeller and all the other people that are connected to this institution that have done harm towards black and brown people, black people in particular. So to me, on a small scale, we also have to look at the relationship that it plays in the community, and that it's not a welcoming space, right? It's an isolated space that, while people like myself may commune through it, you know, we feel often criminalized. You know, from with the relationship that the university police has with the surrounding neighborhood, to just the lack of access to space into the buildings and to, you know, even the academic spaces. It just doesn't exist.
That our blood paid for.
Absolutely. And then lastly, for me, what's also problematic is thinking about the ways in which, like, the crime lab has collaborated with the city, has collaborated with Ken Griffin to sort of study, you know, the very poverty and crime that the university, again, is complicit in, but hasn't given resources to effectively repair the harms that have happened to our community. So that's kind of my thoughts and my stakes in this space.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kofi. Next up is Joan Malone. He's with the Obama Community Benefits Agreement.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I think it's important, as Kofi has sort of mentioned to us, the harm continues, right? It isn't something that just happened at some point in the past, and we're sort of pushing the university to right the wrongs of the past. This is something that has continued since the 1850s, right? Consistently, we see the university acting on the Black community in a way that is to our detriment. Whether we're talking about the university land banking during the Olympics, again, leveraging our existence and our poverty, right, to be able to buy low and sell high, that they're still continuing, right? People have said that the Obama Presidential Center comes to the South Side of Chicago is all the benefit we should expect. That just the presence of it is going to improve the South Side of Chicago so much that we shouldn't be asking for anything beyond that.
And many people believe.
And a lot of people believe that, right?
Exactly.
But the reality is, why did the university submit a bid for the Presidential Center in the first place? Right? It wasn't just out of pure altruism, right? They wanted to do something good for the people that they've been harming for decades. They did it because it's an opportunity to leverage the legacy of the first Black president for their benefit. Explicitly, right? After it was announced that the university won the bid for the Presidential Center, within months they announced they were going to build a brand new hotel. After that, they announced they were building a brand new conference center. Now, why is it all of a sudden you need a brand spanking new hotel and a brand spanking new conference center literally blocks away from where the Presidential Center is going in Jackson Park? Why did it need to go in Parkland in the first place where they're getting a $90 million subsidy off the bat? And they own acres and acres of land in the area.
They want our free land.
And so by this huge subsidy they're getting, they can again build virtually for free, right? You got $90 million you just pocketing. But then they can build commercial for-profit enterprises on the land that they own. Like the hospital, like the hotel, like the conference center, right? Knowing people from around the world are going to be coming to study, to research, to meet in and around the Presidential Center. It's to their benefit. Now, in the bid document, they also say, if the Presidential Center were to go into Jackson Park, it's an opportunity to bring new residents to the area. Now, after that, they say, because there's so much land, there should be no risk of displacement. Anybody who has sense knows that if you bring new, in quotes, more affluent residents into the area, what's naturally going to happen unless you have protections in place for the low-income and working families that's there?
Gentrification or re-sociopathism.
They're going to be pushed out. It has happened not just across the country, across the world.
Yeah.
And to have all this data and all of this research coming out of this institution, I doubt nobody believed that that was going to be the outcome. But again, they tell us what they want us to believe, right? And so for us, the push for a community benefits agreement isn't just right, it's just common sense. The $90 million land subsidy they get, on top of the $300 million, right? They're saying $175 million, but this is Chicago, everything goes over budget. Our taxpayer dollars is going to create the infrastructure, quote unquote, improvements to make the Presidential Center a reality in the first place. The sewer lines, the water lines, the electric lines, the gas lines, tearing up Cornell Drive, expanding Stony Island, expanding Lakeshore Drive. We're paying for all that. Not the Obama Foundation, not some private interest. We're paying for that. And so we're looking at $500 million just off the bat we're responsible for. We're already still paying for the land that was purchased for Michael Reese. Michael Reese Hospital, y'all remember that?
Yes.
Hospital closed, you had acres of vacant land, abandoned buildings. Daley bought it thinking he was going to be able to turn it into the Olympic Village to house the athletes when they came in for the Olympics. Chicago did not get the Olympics. We still got a bill for Michael Reese that we're still paying for, our children are going to pay for, so now we're doubling down. And so the reality is we continue to be abused, not just by this university, by the city. And so what is it that we get to be able to help stabilize our communities? If we don't protect ourselves, it's clear and obvious nobody else will. So our advocacy for a community benefit agreement is the bare minimum. This isn't a radical idea. This is the US. Everybody has a contract for everything. If you want to drive, you have to sign on the dotted line that you're going to be a responsible driver. You have to prove you've gone through tests and you've done your on-your-road training. When you're born, you got to sign a document saying I was born. When you die, you got to sign a document saying I'm dead. So why is it when our taxpayer dollars go on something that somebody thought was going to be a good idea, we shouldn't expect anything in return? It's ridiculous and it's disrespectful.
Yes.
And so the CBA Coalition is asking for your support. We're going to have an event. I think the date is June 6th. Location is to be determined. People here know how to reach me. I'm Juwanza, work at the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. I can give you our phone number, email address, website. I can give you all our information. Please stay in contact with us. We want to be in contact with you. We want you to attend the event. Tell your friends, tell your family what it is that we're doing, because they're trying to make it hard for us. Alderman Harrison, Alderman of the 5th Ward, where the presidential center is going to be built, for 3 years told us that it was ridiculous for us to ask for a community benefits agreement. She entered into a runoff where her seat was on the line, the seat that she had held for a decade, and she flipped, saying, and the insult to injury was, I've always supported the CBA. Because she knows it's the right thing to do. But she knows it's the right thing to do because now her seat's in jeopardy, right? The seat that she feels she was entitled to. And so we have to remind our elected officials that they are in place to represent us. This is the U.S. It's supposed to be a representative form of government, right? That's right. And so when these people are elected, they're supposed to do what it is that we're asking them to do. Doesn't always work that way, but that's our job, to remind them that's what they're supposed to do. So I'll stop. Again, I'm with the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. We're one of the members of the CBA Coalition. Phone number is in the phone book for people who still use a phone book. 773-548-7500. The website is easy. It's obamacba.org. I got to run, pick my son up from school, drop him off at the after school program. But again, Guy, Kane, people know how to reach me. So thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. If you follow us on social media, we will post all of that information so that you can follow the CBA and become more involved. Thank you. So next up is Kamm Howard. He's with NCOVA, or the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparations in America.
Greetings, everyone. And again, thank the organizers for this very important summit. In 2001, Alderwoman Dorothy Tillman in the city of Chicago led through the council a ordinance that has been known to be called the Chicago Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance. This ordinance required that any corporation wanting to do business with the city of Chicago had to research their, I'll let them finish over there. That's okay, thanks. They had to research their organizational documents, determine if they had any complicity with enslavement, and particularly insurance policies or any type of involvement with the enslavement of African people. And then they had to search their predecessor corporations. If they did not do that research, they could not get a contract with the city. If it was found that they had that history and they signed the affidavit certificate saying they did not have any history, then those contracts that they had with the city would be null and void. Initially, the framers of that legislation believed that they could take that information that was provided by the corporations and use it to then move into a legal arena where they can actually sue these corporations utilizing their own research. There were several lawsuits filed, and as one of the lawyers earlier talked about the issue of standing, the judge said we did not have standing to bring a lawsuit, meaning that we were too far removed from the actual injury. Generally, in a court of law, you can sue for a wrong that's done to yourself, or you can sue for a wrong that's done to your parent. Your parent's not able to sue, and in some cases, you can sue for a wrong that's done to your grandparents, if your grandparents are not able to sue on their own behalf. But we were talking about 6, 7, 8 generations back, and the judge ruled that we didn't have standing. He also ruled the statute of limitations ran out. He also ruled that we were so far removed from the injury. But all of those things we know now with medical science. It's a field called transgenerational epigenetics that looks at the effects of trauma on the genes.
Yes.
And in the Jewish Holocaust descendants, third generation descendants from the Jewish Holocaust have what they call a mutated, a gene that's been disturbed, or a portion of a gene that's been disturbed as a result of the trauma. And when you look at some of their colleagues and some of their people whose parents, grandparents did not go through that history, that gene transformation is not there. So people of African descent has undergone 400 years of trauma, not just 6 years of trauma. And 246 years of the most brutal type of trauma. Then 100 years of Jim Crow, which was as brutal, and then police terror and ongoing police terror. So it's then an uninterrupted flow of uninterrupted chain of traumatic events on the everyday living experiences of people of African descent in this country. So if 6 years of trauma was able to affect the genetic code of descendants of the Jewish Holocaust, then we know that the genetic code of people of African descent has been altered in some form. We have not gotten the resources targeted toward studying the effects, but we know it exists. And so legally, we can say that we're not so far removed from the trauma. Look at our DNA. And my son's DNA, and my grandchildren, some that I have and some that I don't have, look at their DNA. The injury still exists. And so we're not so far removed. But back to the slavery disclosure ordinance. Those entities that are doing business with the city or have contracts with the city, again, they were supposed to, in filling out their package at the procurement department to get the contract, there's an affidavit of certificate saying that, yes, we have some history, here's the history, or no, we don't have any history. If a corporation has filled out an application and have signed, no, we do not have any history, and we find out they do, they have committed perjury. And perjury under commercial law has penalties per case. There's a dollar amount of penalty, and there's also the penalty of also being exposed to jail time for perjury. So the University of Chicago has $35 million in contracts. That's and I don't remember the actual number of contracts, but it's more than like 75 contracts. So that's 75 cases of perjury. or 75 cases of false reporting on a document. So we need to do that type of research. The only person who enforces the Chicago Slavery Disclosure Ordinance is the mayor. In the law, the mayor enforces it, and the procurement department is supposed to give an annual report to the city council of who's filed these reports and who's filed these reports. That's supposed to go to the city council. We've tried to get the council, many council members in COBA, to petition the procurement department for the reports. You've been in office 20 years and you've never seen one report, or since 2001. Have you never seen one report? You've been in office 10 years, you've never seen one report. But here's the law says you should receive the report. And none of these aldermen that we've approached were willing to insist that the mayor, Emanuel or Daley, order the procurement department to produce the reports. And so we're fighting up. There's a new mayor, we'll see. 2 days ago, I was in an event here at the University of Chicago where Dr. Conrad Worrell was on the panel. And the panel was from this sociology department here at the university. And the panel was designed to have the panelists determine what they would want to tell the new mayor. Amara Inya was on the panel, Dr. Conrad Worrell, a couple of young brothers who have community organizations on the panel, and a couple other scholars were on the panel. And what Dr. Worrell stated was that he would ask the mayor to enforce the slavery disclosure ordinance, and as a result, we would then be able to build a reparative justice fund from these corporations that we can do reparative work within the city. And so that's where we're at. There's a new mayor. The mayor is of African descent. But one caveat about this new mayor. She, unfortunately, was or gave oral arguments in our reparations lawsuit on behalf of the corporations in 2003-04. So she was a lawyer for Mayor Brown, which is high-priced mega law firm here in Chicago. And when it came to oral arguments, they brought, a person of color, an African woman, to do those oral arguments. We lost the case. I don't know if it was because of her arguments or just the system itself, but it's interesting that she has that history, and now we're before her and saying, hey, right that wrong. That was then. That whole adage, we have no permanent enemies, we have no permanent friends, it's permanent interests. Well, that was then. We can't forgive you if you act right now, but, we're going in it as if we're going against a foe. And she is that until she proves herself otherwise. And so that's where we're at with this slavery disclosure ordinance. I want to quickly shift, if I have 2 minutes, to it's a local strategy, but it's a national strategy that has to be acted on a local level. We had a very unique moment in history in this country in regards to reparations. We have a congressional bill, H.R. 40, which has been revised. I know a lot of people say it's just a study bill, but it was revised in 2016. And introduced in 2017, and I gave everybody, if you don't have, make sure you get one of these pamphlets when you're on your way out. It's a primer to talk about this new bill, what's the difference from the old bill. The old bill was designed to study whether or not there was continued injury among people of African descent from the periods of enslavement, from the periods of Jim Crow segregation, whether or not injury still, whether or not we are still impacted by those periods. The new bill begins with the fact that we know we're still injured. So we don't have to study whether we've been injured. The study is what are those impacts today? And then once we determine what those myriad range of impacts are, what are the programs, policies, and projects that are needed to reverse those injuries? So we're in a unique place. We have the congressional bill, but we also have a Senate companion bill, which we've never had. And so we have an opportunity to have a national debate on both houses of Congress on this issue of reparations. In the House of Representatives, this bill has never made it out of committee. The Subcommittee on Constitution and Civil Rights is chaired by Steve Cohen. He's a Democrat out of Tennessee, predominantly black congressional district. He was the author of the House of Representatives apology on enslavement, where in that apology just said there need to be rectification. But he's the chair of that committee now. He's in favor of hearings. There will be a hearing, congressional hearing, June 18th, I believe, on reparations. The chair of the Judiciary Committee is Steve Knafl. Steve Knafl is also a longtime reparations proponent out of New York. Nancy Pelosi now says she's in favor of the study, so we know it will be if it makes it out of committee, it will get to the floor for a full debate. And COBRA is meeting next week with, we met last January with Cory Booker's office to get him to introduced a Senate companion bill a year ago. And there was been some ongoing talks. There hadn't been any talks for about 7-8 months, but he found it expedient, politically expedient, to introduce this bill now. And it's cool, we need it. No matter when you did it, and that's good. But we met with Kamala Harris's folks last year too, and it wasn't that receptive. But we're meeting again with Kamala Harris next week, with Senator Van Hollen. He's a European descent, longtime supporter of reparations. There are 2 other senators' offices we're meeting with next week. So we want to come out of those meetings with at least 3 co-sponsors for the Senate bill. And COBRA we have our convention in June. And one of the things we're coming out of that convention is what we're naming in COBRA Legislative Action 535, or Legislative Action 535, or Action 535, or simply 535. And the 535 is there are 535 federal legislators, 435 House of Representatives, 100 senators. We want to have principled dialogue with every one of them in order to get these bills to the House floor for a full House and Senate floor for full debate. And there's going to be a lot of local organizing that we're going to have to do that, as well as national. And so this is the most defining moment at the governmental level on reparations that we've seen since the Freedmen's Bureau. And people need to really kind of grasp that and lend your talents and your resources to making sure that we come out of this. This congressional session ends November 2020. 2020. So we still have about 17 months to engage this, to get this to where we needed to get, and hopefully get a law passed. And we had to work on Trump, because if we get it out of the houses, then he'll be the one who has to sign it into law. So there's a lot of work to be done, a tremendous amount of work to be done. But this is what we do as African people in this country. We go against the odds. And there's also always have been help from our allies who are not of African descent, and we need those allies today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kamm. Okay, so next up we have Taylor Norwood. She's with Good Kids Mad City.
Hey y'all, my name is Taylor. I'm 19. And I kind of just wanted to speak on basically my experience growing up around the university. I read a quote in an article from the Chicago Reporter, and it's something along the lines of reparations is not what like a white institution or a white power will give to the Black community. Is what the Black community demands of that institution. And I just felt like that was very powerful. In a sense of, we're still here talking about reparations and if reparations have happened or what reparations look like. I went to American Language Academy, kindergarten through 8th grade, which is right in the heart of like Hyde Park on 54 in like Kenwood.
Yes.
And that was just an experience. I think as a kid growing up, I didn't actually, well, that's not a surprise, but as a kid growing up, I didn't actually understand you know, how the university played into what was going on and just how I grew up. I remember walking outside of school, seeing university police parked on every corner, and not necessarily to make sure that we were safe and to make sure that no harm came to us, but to basically make sure that we were not disturbing the peace. Me and my friends were followed around stores countless times. You go to the parks, you just hang around, you know, getting kids, being dumb, and you just see police cars following you. For what reason? Not sure. I went to King for high school, which is a little outside of Hyde Park in the Bronzeville area. For some odd reason, still police over there. There have been countless times where Black and brown men have been arrested outside of school. Just, it gets ridiculous. It goes as simple as CTA and the university students have their own mode of transportation that we are not allowed to get on. That is crazy.
Subsidized by slave money.
That's insane. We're not allowed to use any of their buildings. I've been on so many school tours at this campus, and it's amazing to me that 10 acres of this university was donated by slave owners, yet only less than 5% of the school's population are African American people. That doesn't make any sense. Woo. And I think that issue has been trying to be solved with, I've been told there's like a UChicago Promise program, which is like any other program. One in every few thousand Black and brown kids get to come here and, you know, be given this amazing opportunity, when it really should be that any Black and brown person, any Black and brown body, regardless of be it youth or elder, who is interested in furthering their education, should be able to have a seat here and to be able to get that opportunity here, because this university was built on our backs. I think it's crazy that our areas only thrive when it has something to do with the students. There's a new university building on like 61st in Cottage Grove, right by 63rd in the Green Line, where you would never see anybody who was not Black years ago. That's right. And there are like white people, no offense, there are white people walking their dogs, you know, and that's just new to me. Like jogging. What? There's like, our communities can't get fresh groceries or good grocery stores, but now that there's a university building on Cottage Grove, there's also a brand new Jules Osco. That's insane. It's insane to me that after 5 years, I actually led a walkout at King last year, April 20th, that Kenwood Academy and Hyde Park Academy participated in, where we all, the whole school, we all just walked out together, and we all marched over here to the trauma center. I think it's insane that was a 5-year process. Why do we have to fight 5 years for a trauma center in our side of the city? That doesn't make any sense. The fact that people don't understand reparations, and the fact that this is a predominantly white institution, regardless if people want to label it that or not, this is a predominantly white institution, and the surrounding area is a Black community. That's insane. There are no white people in Jackson Park and in South Shore, and Bronzeville is still a predominantly Black neighborhood. The fact that we can't afford rent and that we are being displaced and nobody's acknowledging that is an issue. The fact that this is something I should be having to talk about at 19 is amazing. Jackson Park, now we have this Obama library coming up. What are you guys gonna do for Jackson Park? It's crazy to me that there are 2 hospitals within a 5 to 10 minute drive of each other. And one is, reputation is pretty much known that if you go there, you know, and something is very wrong, you might as well just, you're dead. But here now in the heart of this community, we have an upgraded hospital, a hospital where everybody wants to go and you can get the best care, and still yet some people cannot afford to go here. Some people's their insurance is not covered here. I have plenty of friends from Jackson Park, South Shore, Bronzeville, who've never been on this campus. that doesn't make any sense. Who've never been on this campus, I didn't even know myself that there was a University of Chicago before this University of Chicago. And I have spent my whole life in the heart of Hyde Park. That is insane to me. And I think just when you think about all these things, you have to take into account that, as said earlier, reparations look different for different people. And it's not necessarily that throwing money at us is going to solve the issue, but we need resources, especially if you're going to come into our communities and take things for yourself. You also have to give things back, because that's common sense. It's just common sense. So we can't sit here and tiptoe and be like, oh, well, maybe if we give them this or maybe if we give them that, it's not enough. It's not enough. You guys don't make the rules. We do. When you come into our communities, we make the rules for you guys. And I think that's something that has to be understood. So when we get into conversations about reparations and transparency and accountability, you have to make sure that we're including everybody, not just adults, not just elders, not just university students. We need to include everybody, because as a kid, I didn't understand what was wrong with that and what was wrong with the things I was seeing. I was just growing up, and that was just normal for me. And that should not be normal for any kid. Being followed by police should not be normal for any kid. Seeing people being displaced and people moving out of communities and wondering why your community doesn't look the same after a decade, after 2 years, that's not normal. That's not okay.
Ethnic cleansing got a city.
So when we talk about reparations, I think it's just important that we are, one, open to hearing every single side, and two, that we're being as transparent and accountable as possible. And yeah, thanks. Well, thank you for having my TED
Thank you so much for that, Taylor.
Yes.
Really appreciate it. Next up is Claire Haggerty. She's a fourth year at the University of Chicago, majoring in comparative race and ethnic studies and history. In the past, she's interned with Masjid Al-Rabia, Community Activism Law Alliance, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and at the university. She's a member of the Project Reproductive Freedom and enjoys talking about prison abolition, etc. So please welcome Claire.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I feel honored to be here and on this panel with all of y'all. So I am a former student of Professor Mounts. I took his class last year called A Global History of Reparations. In that class, for our final essay, we picked a period of history and looked at the University of Chicago. And I mean, as we all know, any period you look at in our history, you're going to find instances of violence and exploitation. So I looked at the 1930s and the university's housing policy. After that, Professor Mount encouraged me to continue this research in my thesis. So I just last month turned it in. So I was really interested in looking at the university not only as a property owner, but also as an academic institution, and how these two areas are really, they're not really separate entities, they inform each other. And so I was looking at papers at our library of administrators, sociologists. I was also looking at local newspapers, the Hyde Park Herald, the Chicago Defender. And what I was finding was that during this time in the 1920s and 30s, the university was investing a lot of money into homeowners associations, which were groups of property owners who had the goal of neighborhood improvement. And
removal.
Yeah.
Removal.
And so one of their largest goals was to implement restrictive covenants, which were contracts among property owners that prohibited the sale of property to non-white people, and particularly in the agreements that were around this area, specifically excluding Black people. And so, you know, they frequently would just use this term of protection. There was this racist stereotype that Black homeownership would decrease property values. And so
protects us from them.
So this protection was protecting white supremacy, denying Black mobility, maintaining segregation and keeping capital in the hands of white people. And that was the history at this point. So I was using the lens of racial capitalism, which a lot of people have been throwing that around today. It's Todd sort of, I don't know if he's there anymore, but he mentioned how you can't think about race and class as isolated concepts. So I was really looking at how white actors in the housing market systemically exploited people of color for the purpose of capital accumulation. My thesis first looked at what was like the academic theories that were putting forth these ideas that associated race with property values. And you see that in our Department of Sociology, the Chicago School, which became very famous. Mainly the reason they were famous is because they stole a bunch of ideas from W.B. Du Bois and said they were their own and became really famous for it. But they also put forth a bunch of theories and about the city and claiming that there were a lot of like natural processes that were inevitable, like these community boundaries or assimilation. And they were saying that these theories were apolitical and objective, that this was like scientific truth. When you look at that, at the same time that they're putting these theories forward, they're working with politicians, with real estate firms, in order to make these theories truth. So it's just very clearly a political process. So then you get into the 30s, and the area known as the Black Belt, which was during the first migration, as African Americans were migrating into Chicago, they had very few options to live. It was either these white neighborhoods, predominantly white neighborhoods, were either restricted with restricted covenants, or there was the threat of white mob violence. So a lot of people were living in the Black Belt, and in these areas, it was overcrowded. It was absentee landlords, so there was just no maintenance done. The threat of fires, poor hygienic situations because their landlords were just neglecting their properties. So at this time in the 30s, UChicago sort of formed an alliance with the white homeowners that were living around them. The homeowners were interested in getting money to defend restrictive covenants, and the admin wanted white people to live near them because they believed that would maintain property values. And so they start investing in these homeowners associations, and they turn to their sociology department for justification so that they can ground their policy in scientific theory. And the sociologists say restrictive covenants are impermanent. They aren't effective. You can either start building a physical barrier, or the best solution would be to invest in the Black community so that they do not have to move into these predominantly white neighborhoods in the first place, which is still segregationist, but yeah. So the administration, once again, proving their racism, reject this option and instead continue to fund restrictive covenants. From 1933 to 1947, with the exception of a single year, the university spent $83,597 in defending restrictive covenants, which is over $1.5 million today. This money is directly contributing to the deadly conditions of the Black Belt at the time. And so I just wanted to end with one particular case, which is of the Hansberry family.
Hansberry.
Y'all may know Lorraine Hansberry, the author of Raising the Sun. So her father moved into the Washington Park subdivision area in 6140 South Rhodes Avenue, which is just south of here. He moved family there intentionally, knowing that there was a covenant and knowing that he was going to violate that covenant. Within a week of moving in, the Woodlawn Property Owners League, which was one of the university's favorite homeowners associations, sued him, and he takes the covenant to court, saying that it didn't have the required 95% signage. The case makes it to the Supreme Court, and while Carl Hansberry is in Washington fighting the case, his family is left defending their home against their white neighbors who are harassing them daily. One summer, Lorraine and her sister were on the front porch, and a mob surrounded the house, and the girls ran inside, and someone threw a brick through their window, just missing Lorraine.
Yes.
So it's not until 1940 that the Supreme Court case Hansberry versus Lee invalidates the restrictive covenant in Washington Park subdivision. Throughout this 3-year-long legal process, the university is funding all of the legal fees for the Woodlawn Property Owners League. So I think, just some takeaways from my research. I think it's important that we think about how this entire time the university is considered a liberal institution because at the time it did allow Black students to attend. Although we did hear earlier that just a couple years later they were denying Japanese American students. Also, they use this fact frequently in the Chicago Defender. People would attack the university for their support of restrictive covenants, and the university would respond by saying, "Oh, but we let Black students in, and so that makes it okay." And it's just this they're exploiting once again this fact that in order to hide the fact that they have these policies that support segregation. And then finally, just situating this history into the longer pattern of harm the university has perpetrated against its Black neighbors. We know its founding in Douglas's estate, and we've heard current day, when you think about like the crime lab, these are the same sort of like academic theories that are being used to legitimize racist policy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Claire. So next we have Ashley Giles-Perkins. Ashley is a second-year dual degree student at Loyola, where she is pursuing a law degree and a master's degree in cultural educational policy studies. For undergrad, Ashley attended the University of New Haven for her Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice and Bachelor's of Arts in Psych with a minor in English. And she worked and volunteered as a community organizer in her time in undergraduate studies and co-founded Bridgeport Generation Now and Connecticut Organized for Racial Equality, where she served as the political action chair for the Greater Bridgeport NAACP. And a pledged delegate for the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. And while at Loyola, Ashley volunteered with law-related educational programs in the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center and served as the Midwest Regional Chair for the Black Law Students Association. She's also a member of BYP 100. So thank you so much. Can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for my lateness, glad I made it in the nick of time. I did miss a lot of what was said. I do appreciate the comments that I just heard, and thanking all that are on the panel with me. I'm sure I'm gonna maybe beat some things into the ground that have been said already, but I have a pretty comprehensive list about types of reparations that BYP 100, the Chicago chapter, and then the national chapter stand behind, and also some suggestions in terms of some things that may not sound like reparations, but really do get at addressing the history of the nation and making sure that we also are looking forward to the future as well and those type of reparations. And then after that, I'll talk about some specific on the ground works. And so essentially, reparations looks like divesting from the prison industrial complex. That's a loaded ask. A lot of companies, a lot of places that we shop at, clothing brands that we support, travel companies, airlines we fly on are investing in the prison industry, and that is directly harmful to our Black and Brown communities and really to our nation. So that's a totally not separate topic, but can't get into that. Also ending fines for petty crimes and misdemeanors. A lot of us know, and I'm sure there's people in the room, maybe it came up in terms of a lot of reasons why people remain in jail is because they cannot pay the bail. If they just had $500, maybe $5,000 to get out, they would be home, and that's the difference. And so there's organizations like the Chicago Community Bail Fund that does bail people out. BYP 100 has had fun fund to free us, and also for Mother's Day, hopefully getting some incarcerated mothers out of jail. And so some of those initiatives, but really just on a larger scale, ending that system altogether. People should not be in jail simply because they can't pay to get out. Also divesting a lot of universities, and I'm not going to say anything about this university, invest in the prison industrial complex as well, and also play a role in that pipeline. And another form of reparations would be to reduce our police budget. That's here in Chicago, that's here in other places, and then reallocate those funds to the people's vision for public safety. And so I don't say just put it in the community. It's more than putting it in the community. It's where does the money need to go? Where does the community stand? What are that community's needs? The South Side, North Side, and West Side all have Black people in them, and their needs are not necessarily uniform. In terms of education, investing in universal pre-K. This is one of those forward-looking reparations forms that impact all of us. A lot of the data and science says that if a child's not reading by the time that they're entering school, they're already behind. A lot of children come into school reading and writing, and a lot of children from our communities come in learning those skills in kindergarten, which is what you're supposed to do in kindergarten. But if you come in with classmates that are already light years ahead of you, you're only going to get further and further behind. And a lot of us have heard the statistics about the third grade reading level. If you're not reading on third grade reading level, they build what? Jail cells. Okay. And so that very brief time between kindergarten and third grade, a lot of those issues can be mitigated if we would just have universal pre-K, and that's for everyone, and that's regardless of your income. Fully funded in quality public education. That's self-explanatory. It goes off of the universal pre-K, and more so expanding that through higher education. And so a free, or sometimes they say public education, free higher education, private, public, it doesn't really matter in terms of reparations. If you're have been harmed in the past, denied admissions in the past, unable to get an education, a lot of us are still first generation college students, and so making those accesses and those barriers, just breaking those down. In terms of housing and some other things, so accountability and redress for predatory lending. I'm not sure, maybe we touched on it already about redlining in the communities, and totally restricting people of color from living in certain areas. I know we just went into that. Intentional supports for first-time home buyers. So not just saying, here's this program, here's a pamphlet, but being more intentional and ensuring that not only the person gets that home, gets that down payment, but can maintain their home and have payments that are feasible for their income. And if they're not feasible, making sure that we're working with that person, preventing and eliminating foreclosures, especially in Black and Brown communities, something that BYP 100 is working on, and I'll talk about in a bit, community benefit agreements. So for example, if you're living in an area maybe near the new Obama Park that is getting built and is going to be beautiful, but you're concerned about your rent, or if your landlord has said, okay, we won't raise your rent, but okay, but what about taxes? Am I able to still pay taxes for that area? And so another form of reparations, supporting community land trusts, strengthening supports for co-ops. So a lot of the issues are because we've had a lot of our supports taken away from us. We've had to do a lot of things ourselves, and we've seen time and time again in history. For example, just one, Black Wall Street. Black people were thriving, living on their own, self-sufficient, self-sustaining, and what did they do? Bomb the community. They said, absolutely not. I know you said you can't live with us over here, but we also don't want you living over here and like thriving. That also can't happen.
White terrorists.
Yeah. In terms of more economic justice reasoning, so again, barriers to housing, maybe free housing for certain communities, forgiveness of debt, including student loans, again, free higher education, and then also going back to education, so improving and defending our affirmative action policies. A lot of those have been stripped away, pulled back, used for other diverse groups that may or may not mean Black and Brown communities that they were intended for. And
it was for Black.
It was.
Not Black and Brown.
The people that were actually enslaved.
Yeah.
You need to get off of that too.
Exactly.
What I mean is, what I mean now is typically it's for white women, is who it's benefited the most.
I'm in agreement.
Yeah. And so eliminating inherently racist standardized testing. A lot of the tests were intended to keep Black people out. This is also a form of something that we've seen come back, which is the literacy test for voting, which was already deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, but we've seen them resurface in other ways in the last decade or so. Also, parts of the Voting Act rights have just been repealed in a couple years ago. Mandatory anti-racist training for teachers, faculty, and staff. That's all staff. And again, mandatory. And increased incentives for people of color that are educators, making sure that we have especially Black men in our classrooms. For Black boys, that's been shown to be positive influences that impact their education down the road, and also commitments to retaining those Black teachers in our communities. And then opportunities for holistic freedom schools that are rooted in the community with community supports, community buy-in, and again, that self-sustaining, rebuilding, revitalizing ourselves so that we can be thriving. And then just a few others just on health. So access to free and emotional trauma, support and counseling. That way we can address a lot of the traumas associated with institutional and systemic racism. Some of us, I haven't read it yet, but I'll bring it up, post-traumatic slave disorder. And so just getting on that, traumas in the community, gun violence, family traumas, etc. And then eliminating food deserts in our communities. I could go on, but that's the list I had prepared.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Ashley. So, and last but not least is Kai Parker. He is with the Reparations at UChicago Working Group as well.
Okay, well, thanks so much everyone for coming. It's been such a wonderful event, and thank you to all the panelists and this panel. It's really been great. I think a lot of things I'll be talking about will resonate with things that have come up. And I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between numbers or the numerable and forms of charisma when we talk about what is reparations for, and what is the relationship between the kinds of kind of empirically ascertainable labor that Black people have put into the rise of the United States as this giant hyperpower, and the kind of more ineffable forms of labor, in the ways that sometimes very kind of material, kind of quantifiable forms of labor can help produce the kinds of charisma, social capital that have undergirded and kind of legitimized the American project more broadly. And I've been thinking about it particularly in relation to the University of Chicago, in part because of conversations I've had recently and certain kinds of documents that have come out of the University of Chicago. Particularly recently, there's been some attempts to reform aspects of graduate education at the University of Chicago, where I'm finishing my PhD. And there was one particular document that made a couple of very cursory, kind of superficial references to diversity and inclusion. But other than that, did not really say anything that spoke to the issue of race, except its assertion that the university was founded in 1890. That was the one kind of direct reference to the racial project of the University of Chicago. So I've been thinking more about why is that date so important? What kinds of charisma does that date mobilize for the university? And how can that charisma be combated as a way to move the university off of this date, which I think is very important for the reparations project. And so my talk is kind of about that, basically. So the University of Chicago remains officially committed to the 1890 founding date. The university website states on multiple pages that it was founded in 1890. And one might notice, perusing the various recent university documents, a juxtaposition of the assertion of the 1890 starting date on one hand, and claims that the university values diversity on the other. So for example, on the history page of the university website, the first sentence is, on July 9th, 1890, the university's founders defined what they believed would build an enduring legacy, a commitment to rigorous academics for people of all backgrounds. So in that quotation, you have the founding of the university in 1890 tied to the idea that the university is always already a place where people of all backgrounds can study and be enlightened. And so because of this kind of formulation, the university presents Black people's presence at the university as an example of the university's own inherent benevolence and racial progressivism, rather than as an outcome of an ongoing Black struggle. In the university's rhetoric, that struggle is erased. The reason for this erasure becomes clearer as one scrolls down the website's history page. The third paragraph of the page states, with the merry gait of a campus tour, that, quote, "The campus landscape was shaped by legendary landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted's designs for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, which was just a short walk from where the university held its first classes," end quote. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition was a World's Fair, and its exhibits and attractions announced the rise of the US among the great powers of the world, a rise stoked by Midwestern industrial might and technological prowess. The fair was held primarily on the strip of greenery between 59th and 60th Streets known as the Midway, which runs between two sides of the current university campus and increasingly is in the middle of the campus as the campus expands inexorably into Woodlawn. But as Thomas Holt observes in his History of African Americans, the university adjacent exposition had another purpose. That was to help reunite the North and the South in bonds of affection, political economy, and sense of national destiny. By the 1890s, the North had long tired of the sectional crisis over slavery that had led to the Civil War, and the state of war continued, known as Reconstruction. White Southerners had overthrown the Reconstruction governments, and Jim Crow was ascendant. Holt states that the exposition made many concessions to the white South in its planning and administration, and white supremacist Southern state committees controlled the means of most Blacks' participation. So in response to the indignities and erasures that resulted at the fair, a group of concerned Black leaders disseminated a pamphlet called "The Reason Why the Colored American is Not at the World's Columbian Exposition." The pamphlet was edited by I.W. Wells and featured an introduction by Frederick Douglass. The pamphlet argued that the story of American greatness could not be told by forgetting slavery and denying the achievements of the Black struggle for freedom. I.W. Wells and her collaborators indicated that by whitewashing that history, the exposition aligned itself with the anti-Black scourges of the age, among them lynching, convict lease labor, and segregation laws. The erasure of the university's roots in slavery allows the university to locate itself amid the World's Columbian Exposition's heralding of an American modernity unfettered by the problems of race that had dominated the 19th century. The exposition was known as the White City due to its neoclassical architecture, yet the name is also suggestive of the exposition's racial project. The university is associating itself in its current literature with the fair's architecture and ideology implies that the University of Chicago began as the white university. The university argues that, and as I said, that the old Bronzeville campus, the old University of Chicago, as it was renamed, has no relation to this new 1890 entity. One of the problems of the erasure of the university's roots in slavery is that it allows the university to present its excursions into diversity and inclusion, as well as into different kinds of reform projects in the broader city of Chicago, as unsullied benevolence, as extensions of the university's own originary founding dedication to rigorous inquiry for all. The story that the university tells of itself does not acknowledge that the roots of its aura of rigorous inquiry lie in its sordid slave past. It thereby it separates the enslaved Black labor that enabled the university to acquire its academic charisma from the academic charisma of the post-1890 institution. And here, basically, by academic charisma, I mean forms of prestige and kind of intellectual aura that the university cultivates and thinks of itself as being a kind of unique example of, even compared to its other kind of elite peer institutions like Harvard and Berkeley and whatnot. And I'm particularly using the word charisma to draw attention to the ways that even in this neoliberal era, a lot of the university's cultural capital comes from its origins in the originally theological project of university education. This is very directly clear at the University of Chicago since it began as a Baptist college. So reparations work in this university, and in all universities, I think, should fight this academic charisma. I think one of the goals of reparations work should be to become disenchanted with the university that it's operating in. So often you'll go to ostensibly very progressive academic conferences. What you'll actually find is that they're very kind of hierarchically organized. The professors who have big chairs are kind of surrounded by their kind of worshipful cadre of impoverished grad students. And these are often conferences that are ostensibly dedicated to various forms of radical praxis and whatnot. So I think it's very important as a kind of, as Guy was talking about, a kind of lived reparations praxis and being, if you will, that even the mode in which we talk about these things within the university has to disenchant itself from the charisma and the aura that the university is trying to impose on all of these things. Yeah, brainwashing. Okay, so Black spiritual and intellectual traditions have provided a conceptual framework for understanding the relationship between Black labor and academic charisma. In a key passage in W.E.B. Du Bois's 1935 book, Black Reconstruction, Du Bois describes how, during the Civil War, former slaves sang gospel music in celebration of their having freed themselves when they went on strike from slave labor, often but not always by fleeing plantations, and found myriad ways of joining the Union cause, from fighting in the Union Army to praying for victory in untended cotton patches. Du Bois referred to this music as, quote, America's one real beauty, as slavery's one redemption, end quote. Here Du Bois highlighted how the Black workers moving from slave labor to abolitionist labor produced not only material and economic consequences, but also produced an incalculable, charismatic national resource, beauty. The UChicago administration is well aware of the importance of forms of academic charisma that are not only central to the university's financial outlook, although they absolutely are, but also exceed that outlook, or at least claim to. This has perhaps been demonstrated most recently by the university's attempts to hold aloft the banner of free speech, even as compared to its other peer institutions. And it would be interesting to study the link between, the possible link between UChicago's claim to a unique defense of free speech as compared to its peer institutions, and UChicago's unique total disavowal and refusal to acknowledge any relationship to slavery. I wonder if there's any kind of tie between those two, at least in terms of how the logics of the university operate. Perhaps there is a fear that acknowledging these origins of academic charisma in slavery lessens academic charisma's power. Taken as an interpretive framework, the critique of the anti-Black practices that have leveraged academic charisma could be applied to other episodes in the university's history beyond its founding and its revisionist founding. For example, one of UChicago's claims to racial progressiveness, as several folks have talked about, has been its training of an influence on prominent mid-20th century Black intellectuals such as St. Clair Drake, Horace Cayton, and Richard Wright. Drake and Cayton's 1945 book, Black Metropolis, A Study of Negro Life in a Northern City, is a masterpiece of urban studies and a tribute to the social science training that Cayton and especially Drake went through at UChicago. The book is central to the enduring reputation of the Chicago School of Sociology and of the university's contribution to Black studies. Yet, in the 1950s, St. Clair Drake lived in UChicago's neighborhood of Hyde Park while teaching at Roosevelt University, and his archival papers document his participation in the struggle of the mostly Black Southwest Hyde Park Homeowners Association, which is a complicated organization, to thwart the UChicago-led urban renewal policies that drove thousands of Black residents out of Hyde Park during this time. And there's an interesting tie here into what Petey was talking about earlier in relation to the Woodlawn Organization, in that in 1958, First Presbyterian Church, which was at that time co-pastored by one Black pastor and one white pastor, and had a integrating, what was purported to be an integrating congregation, but was actually a transitioning congregation from an all-white to an all-Black congregation. But for the moment, integrated. So basically, the church and the president, actually the vice president of the University of Chicago, reached out to Martin Luther King in 1958 to give a talk essentially aligning what the university and what First Presbyterian was doing under the kind of broader banner of racial progress that the Civil Rights Movement represented. And King's secretaries responded very favorably to this process, and it was kind of viewed as a kind of comrades in action, basically, fighting for racial diversity, and a kind of early version of what we now think of as diversity and inclusion. But, I mean, what the university was actually doing at the time, of course, was engaging in this urban renewal project, and the vice president, the same person who reached out to King, is on record saying that the purpose of urban renewal was to, quote, cut down on the number of Negroes in the area. And yet, there was a way in which the university was able to marshal its own charisma to attract Martin Luther King's charisma as the preeminent Black leader at that time, in order to bring these forces together to essentially sanctify the project of urban renewal under the broader banner of racial progressivism, civil rights, and ostensible equality. And so that's one example of why it's so important to challenge the workings of charisma in the local projects, racial projects that the university is engaged in. Because they're so powerful that they can even turn someone like Martin Luther King into an agent of urban renewal. Yeah. So at the same time as this was going on, the persistence of racism in Chicago dampened the hopes of a local interracial, for a local interracial labor movement that Horace Cayton had expressed in the book Black Metropolis. And that depression drove him out of Chicago and into myriad personal problems, which he wrote about extensively, his kind of psychological crack-up once he realized that the labor movement that he celebrated in Black Metropolis was not going to democratize Chicago. So behind the enduring academic charisma of Black Metropolis's kind of aura in the academy is the largely forgotten struggle of Black people who lost their fights against the white city and the white university. So I'm just going to close with a quote by Frederick Douglass in his introduction to the pamphlet of The Reason Why the Colored American is Not at the World's Columbian Exposition. And I think that these words could apply to any serious attempt of the university to engage at least in a dialogue of sorts with, or at least just acknowledge the idea, the truth of its history in slavery. So Douglass wrote in the pamphlet, quote, "It is sincerely hoped for that this brief story, not only of our successes, but of trials and failures, our hopes and disappointments, will relieve us of the charge of indifference and indolence. We have deemed it only a duty to ourselves to make plain what might otherwise be misunderstood and misconstrued concerning us. To do this, we must begin with slavery." Thanks.
Thank you all for your contributions to the panel. I sincerely appreciate them. And I know that some folks out here certainly do as well. Saw a lot of nodding heads, which is great. So I'm gonna first and foremost, I am going to make just two small comments, and then I'm gonna turn over to the audience for the remaining time that we have, which isn't much. So a lot of the panelists spoke about police, and Ashley in particular, you spoke about the police budget reallocation in particular. And this is sort of to anyone that wants to answer this particular question. First, I guess, as background, the university police used to be the largest police force outside of the Vatican. I think it's number 3 now. But it's still pretty large. But all of you have really spoken to, in one way or another, sort of the terror of police on people in this community. I wanted to hear perhaps what would a path towards writing that, a path towards towards repairing what, actually sort of transforming, I suppose I should say, a la one of the last panels. What would the path towards transforming that be? Or would it be sort of first a reallocation of the police budget, as Ashley pointed out, towards a transition of sort of no police or police abolition? What would that look like? What would the writing of that be?
Well, in Cobra, we have a position paper on our website called Reparations Means Full Repair. And under international norms, and we kind of wrote this into HR 40, into the legislation, under international norms, reparations should produce 5 outcomes. The first outcome is cessation and guarantees of non-repetition. So whatever criminal acts or bad acts that are being committed, you must first cease those acts. And then you must guarantee, put things in place that guarantees that they're not repeated. And so when we look at not only policing, but the entire criminal justice system, we see that these bad acts are still being committed. And so there has to be some form of revolution in that particular system. But how do you guarantee that the police violence that that are meted upon our community, how do you guarantee that that's not repeated? And so what we're able to come up with on the short-term level is police community control, or community control of police, I should say, something like CPAC, where they have the power to actually punish the police, fire, and those type of police, those type of powers and oversight. It's the only way you're going to get into the guarantees of non-repetition. And that's only in the short term. And so we have to do things also on the long term, as you say, eradicating policing. But on the short term, community control of police will have an immediate effect of halting that type of police violence against our community.
Thank you so much for that. So the first comment, and then the second one was on the theme of displacement, because I think whether Claire, you spoke about the university sort of funneling money into projects that from 1933 to 1947 that actively displaced or would not allow Blacks and likely other older folks as well to be able to live within a certain area. And I know that actually, and that of course continues today, and I know that actually I have a friend that was here from the 1960s into the 1970s as a graduate student, and even then she couldn't find housing past going up from 62nd Street. So even in the 60s going into the 70s, it was still an issue. My question on displacement is similar in that I want to sort of connect that to the community benefits agreement. Fortunately, Joan isn't here. But in terms of displacement and space, I want to also ask, how do we as we begin to sort of conceptualize, the harm that's being done, also how do we, sort of begin to bring about a process where, our communities are, in effect, not made whole, because I don't think that could ever happen, but sort of put on a path towards wholeness.
I think I can touch on it. So with the community benefits agreement, part of it is to have at least 35% affordable housing available to the community. So I think you have to think about kind of going beyond that.
Yes.
Is that new housing?
Yeah.
New housing.
Yeah. Between, I think, 1999 and 2016, you saw about $30 million of TIF money gets circulated out of the community. So that's, money that's not coming back into our community, it's not being reinvested, and it's not trickling down to everybody within the neighborhood. So for me, I think an idea of like was stated, how do we build land trust? How do we build cooperative economics in our communities? And what are the roles, that the university is going to be beholden to allocate funding for that? That has to kind of be the conversation beyond the community benefits agreement. There has to be this idea that, the university has to reinvest, and, with all the property that it owns, all the money that it has flowing in, it has to allocate a very specific number to ensure that a community can thrive without being displaced. Anything short of that is not going to be sustainable, and it's not, and especially in a time where we're losing 3,000 people a year of African descent from Chicago, and we're looking at more environmental injustice and factors in climate change. We have to have those conversations now, because we're not talking about building sustainable communities that can withstand those kind of extreme changes. We're going to be the ones that are most vulnerable and are going to end up harmed far more than anyone else. And that's disaster in the making. So that's kind of my proposal, or my thinking around some of the steps that needs to happen. And it's happening now with the CBA, but that has to be a launching point to more momentum to get more resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley.
If I could just add, I wanted to go back to your first question, and honestly, I do think it's tied into your second question as well.
Absolutely.
But so for BYP's perspective, it is the end goal is to abolish the police, just because of what it is rooted in. It was not put in place to protect and to serve. Yes. And then honestly, a Supreme Court case last year said that there is no duty to protect. That's not actually required. So it's kind of just a slogan for the police. And so the system, I would say, is actually not broken. Is working the way it was intended and it was designed, which was to criminalize Black bodies, to take away your dignity, to make it harder when you go back. You're not kind of went back to this 3/5 of a person. You can't vote, you can't get housing, you can't live with your family, you can't go here or there. And so all of that's connected. And so I think what we've been doing is we're saying, well, abolish slavery, and that's not actually true. A lot of us in this room probably saw 13, and we kind of went from one aspect to another, and it kind of just has morphed into one. And so I think what it looks like, as I was saying, is taking that money away from criminalization of the community and putting it back into the community. And what that would look like is resources, education, access to healthcare, having access to some of these things that we're talking about, like co-ops, farming, green spaces. That also addresses some of those environmental concerns. And
the Obama Library is going to take free green space, and we have a mass grave in the city of Chicago due to the effects of climate change of African Americans.
Yeah, and the air quality is poor. And
that's our only public 24-hour cooling center that they're going to steal from us. Because they're going to kick us out just like Millennium Park, okay?
So, and then even, like we're saying, 35%, some of the asks that we're asking, yes, take this money, but then reinvest it back. It's got to be a stronger demands on the community side. And I think part of that is if we are less bogged down with the criminal justice system, less bogged down in terms of not having needs, because honestly, that's why most people commit crimes. They don't have what they need. They steal, they're hungry, they're worried about their children and putting the next meal on the table. And so if we can have a stronger community where those are not concerns, people are not going to commit crimes. We don't need the police. We can police ourselves. That's how we used to do things. I know a lot of the older folks in the room, you call the police, they don't come to certain neighborhoods. People had to do things themselves. And so we need to get back to that kind of collectiveness, those Kwanzaa principles in terms of collective economics and making sure that we are rebuilding our communities, but at the same time holding places like maybe University of Chicago and City of Chicago to the fire and making sure that our demands and our voices are clear and heard.
Fantastic. Yes. And now we'll take questions from the audience. Okay, so, well, all right. One.
Excuse me, I just want to know the name of that court case where you said that they don't, the police don't have to protect and serve
the name.
that
I'll get
fraud.
you the name. Yeah, I'll get you the name. I saved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the police are only here to protect capital.
That's right.
Have any of you ever heard of the Black People's Topographical Research Center or the Third World Press? Any of them?
Third World Press, yeah.
Yeah. You know what happened to the Black People's Topographical Research Center? I lost track of it. There were a group of people, they were had education in geography, architecture, urban planning, city planning. And they had an office on 75th Street, 76th Street, I don't know exactly where. And they did research on the city of Chicago, the history of land transfer, development all across the city of Chicago. They had all these maps, and they showed who owned what. And when they showed the University of Chicago, it looked like the Spanish Empire around this area. You'd be surprised. Well, I wouldn't. I was surprised then, I'm not surprised now how much land the University of Chicago owned. Those of you who were born and raised in Chicago, you remember what 63rd Street used to look like?
Yeah. Exactly.
From Stony Island all the way back?
Yes.
Remember the Maryland Theater? Remember the Tivoli? Remember all the stuff that used to be around there? It's all gone. It looks like World War II was fought there. That's not an accident.
War was on us.
And, yes.
Me?
Yes.
And it still is.
Hi, my name is Angelica Moore. Not a student here. Went to University of London School of Oriental African Studies. Did my master's in economic development, focusing on Africa and the diaspora. My question is, and I wasn't here for the first half prior to lunch, but on the second half, we had a conversation more so surrounding the research in regards to what it will take to have a case for reparations. But my question is, do we really need to do more research on what exactly is needed to give us? And I guess that's a rhetorical question because I gotta know the answer already. But I guess we talk about having a case for reparations. What I want to know is, how do we get from HR 40 to the actual table? I know you went through that, but we need to expedite this. So how, in all honesty, and I appreciate everything that the panel has been talking about, but I think we're making very light demands on the people that have abused, terrorized, you name it, us in this country. So I guess that's more of a commentary, but I really want, you know, when they say when you sue somebody, you never go at the lowest bid. You go as high as you can go, and then what you get, if they meet you in the middle, that'll be okay. So I think the demands that we're making is literally humane demands that we're making, but we should go above and beyond the demands that we have been making for literal decades and get what's actually due to us, which is more than the basic needs that we should already have. Protection, no food deserts, less policing, resources in the public school system. These are basic demands that have been asked for, requested, fought for, people have died for. So what I'm not understanding is, as an academic and as speaking to academics on the panel and being in an academic institution here and abroad, we don't need to keep having conversations anymore. We need to really push forward. And I really love what you said, the 19-year-old, I didn't get your name, young lady, but you put passion in my heart.
Yes.
You put passion in my heart for what you said, because as a teacher, not far from the culture, a little bit older than you, but younger than some people in the room, it is so motivating to know that you get it, because they say so many of the youth don't get it. They don't care. They're reckless, you know. But then it's just refreshing to hear you speak and hear your passion and your heart. But you know, I just feel like, and this is from what I've learned and what I've heard today, I'm just exhausted from, and a literal exhausted and a physical exhausted from us still having these conversations about how do we research reparations? How do we go about making a claim for reparations, a case for it? We've made a case. We've made a case since we were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule. That was the case. We're supposed to have this case already in the books and on paper. It's literally on paper, but it just hasn't been done. And we need to put more pressure on our so-called leaders, the so-called administrators, and the politicians. I mean, who sell us out, but sell themselves out as well. Because when you line your own pockets, it's the same thing that happens with a lot of African politicians. You line your own pockets and you forget about your whole people, your whole country. That's globally. It's a global conspiracy, yes, but it's not really a conspiracy because we know what's happening. But I just wanted to also publicly answer your question for the people who didn't know. She asked earlier, and I'm paraphrasing, but she asked, how do we answer the question of, to people, immigrants and people who are here alike, non-white and white immigrants who come to this country and have the question, why do we need to pay you guys reparations? And we didn't enslave your ancestors. We had nothing to do with it. If I'm to publicly answer you, this is a super easy question. Number one, if anyone asks that question, they don't care. That's number one. They're not going to do any research. They're not going to put in that work to find out when you come to this country who literally built this country. And number two, specifically for European migrants, if you will, who have come here and lived here post World War II, they were beneficiaries from the Marshall Plan. Woo, so when you talk about the Marshall Plan, this was aid that the U.S. sent to rebuild Europe after World War II. So our tax dollars from our ancestors went to go help everybody, Europeans, literally everyone. So if it is someone who's a part of the European Union who wants to ask and say, my ancestors didn't enslave Africans, you actually probably did if you're from Belgium, because you King Leopold. But you know, I'm on a tangent, but you know, I just want to shout you out, young lady, because you're from my heart. Everybody on the panel, thank y'all so much. But I just feel like our demands, our basic human demands, that should have already been met, and we need to go harder on that.
I want to address that.
Making demands and wings.
I want to address the sister's comments. The case was made in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism that settled the whole issue about should there be reparations. We no longer have to make that case. It was argued before the international community, and it was settled that those were crimes against humanity. Right. Those crimes had an economic basis, and that reparations was due. There was no more need to have make an argument since then, and we've stopped arguing. Our organization has stopped arguing, and many people of African descent around the world have stopped arguing for the need of reparations. The work is now, how do we get reparations? Because the case has already been made. You talk about the demands as being just basic social justice demands, and that we need to go harder. I personally, as a member of the National African American Reparations Commission, we revised HR 40. And so I wrote into HR 40 that the outcomes of reparations should be in alignment with international norms, international law around reparations. There must be 5 outcomes. The first one is cessation and guarantees of non-repetition. The second one is restitution. That's all your educational initiatives, all your economic development initiatives, all of your safety initiatives, all of your housing initiatives. The third component is compensation. Under international law, compensation is a component. We don't, press that out in the public, but that is a component of restitution, reparations. The fourth component is satisfaction. How do you return the dignity back to a people whose dignity was eroded? That's where we have to completely revise the entire curriculum in this country for African people to get our dignity back.
Yes.
It has to be a total telling of history all over again. And then the fifth component is rehabilitation for the heart, mind, and spirit damage that we've suffered. So this is written into the new HR 40. So that the demands have not even been identified, but we know that they must meet these outcomes. And so we, as creative as we can be, we can craft any demand we want, not some minor, little thing, but as creative and as impactful as we need to be, because under international law, reparations must, quote, wipe out all consequences, unquote, of the crime. Now, you're talking about what are all the consequences of the crimes committed against our people? That's the only studying we need to do. Let's find out what are all the consequences.
That's what I was talking about.
See what I'm saying? Then we craft strategy and projects and policies. That's what we need these minds in these institutions to help us determine what those projects and policies and practices will be to wipe out all consequences of those crimes.
Thank you. So you're next, and then so you're next. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a question actually directly towards you. My name is Anneke. I'm an arts administrator, art educator, and art therapist here in Chicago. I went to the School of the Arts in Chicago. So I've been studying how to design curriculums that play towards reparations. One of my questions is there a list somewhere that exists that calculates these things, that these egregiouses or these fucked up situations that we can calculate into real time and labor? For instance, for every black man that was lost between 1960 and 1992 due to some type of gun charge or some type of drug charge, is there a way to calculate the labor that was lost on those people? And is there a set of tools that exist that help us do that already instead of creating new stuff?
I'm not certain if that exists, but I know that there has been attempts to quantify the economic loss to a community from someone going to prison, or someone dying, the father of some dying from some type of violence or whatever. Mm-hmm. There has been attempts to quantify that. I don't know if a list like that exists, but that's part of what I think a reparations package should produce. So we can.
Is there a template for others to follow that's for like a package to put together, or is that something that?
I don't know if one exists.
You can put one together.
That's for sure. And I think it's definitely needed, so we can really quantify the full impact, the full economic impact, because we have quantified the economic impact of stolen labor for 246 years. But what about loss of life?
Correct.
So
and
I think
that's to be moved throughout CPS, throughout a lot of colleges in Chicago as well. I think there tends to be people don't want to put dollar amounts onto things because it impersonalizes it. It makes it like less. It dehumanizes people to put dollar signs on them, but it actually gives us real numbers to go to them and be like, hey, this is actually what was lost. And I think our people, Black people, Africans abroad should start really putting dollar amounts on things. And I mean, to teach that structurally or culturally is something that I believe lends itself to reparations as well. So with the work that I'm doing around the nation is we're designing curriculum that teaches that type of stuff.
Thank you. Okay.
So in terms of knowledge production, I had a question around, first I want to make a comment. It feels like a theme of like the University of Chicago and like issues around like reparations with these institutions such as Harvard. To me, it deals with this kind of northern racism that we don't really talk about. Like we associate racism with like, you know, hillbillies, the South, you know, rednecks, stuff like that. But we don't talk about institutional northern racism that Black people in cities, you know, who move from the Great Migration up into cities that we have been experiencing, right? So I think that there needs to be more work around that because, and I don't know what like is happening on an institutional level. Like I haven't taken any classes that really talk to, you know, this northern institutional racism. And if we don't address that, like if we don't address it in our education system, how do we stop it from happening? Like, so I think that damage is going to continue to occur until we actually figure out like what is causing this racism. Well, we know what's causing it, white people, but that too. But so I would like to know y'all thoughts around that. Like, how do we get institutions to reteach or to like, you know, use the institutional structure to repair like what's going into people's brains so they can stop being racist, right? So that's one question. Another question I have is around like the mobilization and next steps of the organizations that are on this panel and stuff. Like, what are you doing next? And also, how are you mobilizing the community, especially the community that is most impacted? I think this event is fantastic. I'm so great that you all put that together. Yes. I'm so thankful that you invited the community, made it an open space. Yes. What's next for your? Yes. Let's stop. I would love to know what are you doing next and how are you recruiting people in the community to join your cause? And also, shameless plug, my sister, I don't know if I reached out to you on Facebook already, but I definitely would love for you to be a part of the Juneteenth event that I'm planning. It's a citywide event. Also, you, sir, as well. I need to talk to y'all afterwards. Yeah. Also, BYP, I've been talking to people, Cosette and stuff, but we can talk. Yeah.
So.
Especially the what's next.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of things. First, we only have 2 minutes. in this room. We have till 5:30. Oh, awesome. Oh, great.
Some of us don't have till 5:30.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, some of us don't have till 5:30. Okay, so in terms of okay, let's see. Because there are a lot of things. In terms of northern racism, there are quite a few works of literature on that. The first that comes to mind is The Color of Law by Rothstein, which yes. Okay, so you already know, which essentially documents, you know, not only housing discrimination, but also sort of, you know, it's essentially the way that, and also like sort of at the end of The Color of Law, one of his prescriptions for all of this sort of, you know, discrimination that happened you know, throughout the 20th century, you know, is essentially reparations. So if we teach, and to your point about teaching, if we teach sort of a text such as that, and we sort of institutionalize text such as that can foster a mindset that can, you know, sort of, you know, get to your point. So that's the first one. And then in terms of our next steps, the first thing is that we're going to be, you know, sort of soliciting scholars to sort of look at the research, to sort of, you know, put a check by it and say, this is, you know, yes, this is great. And also the University of Chicago should acknowledge that this is their history and that, you know, it is built on the blood of enslaved people. So that's one thing in terms of like, you know, getting a sort of network of scholars to, you know, together in order to sort of sign a letter to say that. The other thing is that we to your point about community, we certainly want community input. And in fact, we would also like the community to lead this, you know, actually, like, you know, if possible. However, yeah, in terms of what this was actually sort of the first part of this in terms of, getting community voices, to the table. But, first of all, we would like to do sort of more events like this. But also, in terms of the Imagining Reparations thing that Anne and Nancy have put together, that's an easy way for folks to sort of say what reparations would look like to them, and then that way we can sort of work on those things together and bring and hopefully bring the community and the University of Chicago to the table, so and so that we can have those imaginations become a reality. And also in terms of just reaching out, we're going to also sort of we would like folks to reach out to us if possible as well, because we welcome sort of like setups of meetings, because we always have time for that.
Where would we get your contact information?
Yeah, so our contact information, so it can be via social media, which is at THERAUC on Twitter, and also we have a Facebook page, and also we have an email which I will distribute at the end. But we wanted to have this be the sort of, well, this isn't the first thing, but sort of like a large opening line of communication between sort of folks that are here and us, so that we could affect the project to y'all's vision, not ours. Okay.
Is there a list of contacts that you all have already reached out to in Chicago? Because there are certain groups that are already doing that work.
Coco. Well, a lot of people on this panel. Yes, and a lot of the organizations on this panel, and a lot of the organizations on other panels we have reached out to. It's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I really also appreciate the space for bringing in community members as well, because I think a lot of the times the students who attend Chicago or non-Black people who are affiliated with the university, it's so easy to just separate ourselves from the community. And just from my background, that also kind of comes from like seeing a lot of non-Black people just consume Black culture and like fetishize it. So I really appreciated your honesty. Like, if you take something, then like give something back. So I just want to know from anyone on the panel or anyone in the room, really, like, how do you see students participating and like doing, like, for example, I'm planning to hit up the community benefit agreement and see like, what there is to do about that. But so any other things similar to that would be useful, that students could actually meaningfully engage in without being like members of the community in a different way, would be useful. And then also, you're talking about how there's all these new buildings popping up, like full glass buildings all over like Cottage Grove near the Green Line. So like with regards to the community benefit agreement, if there's anything else that kind of like movements towards securing people who already live there, if any of that's going on, I think that would be really useful to know as well.
Todd. Go ahead.
Todd. Just to because like your question was just like everything that I was thinking about, and I really appreciate you asking him about like what do we like. It seems like the theme of the three panels today, people were saying the same things, similar things, right? Free education, free healthcare. We have to consider how the current climate crisis is figuring into what reparations looks like to Black folks. Like, these are some demands that are actually live that could be fought for. There are the traditional routes that folks are already going through, and we should continue to do that. If only to expose how false they are and how they are set up not to give us reparations. But also we have to be in the street. We have to mobilize. When we talk about mobilizing, it's like we have to mobilize our folks to think. and everything, but we have to organize, mobilize our folks to organize and be in the street and like actually shut things down. Cause actually that gets the goods in like legislation and stuff. The other thing is like
national boycott, corporations.
Even more than that, occupying space, like taking up space, making sure that the wheels of the system don't move. And I'm like borrowing that from history, but it's a real thing that actually works. We've seen it happen, right? Like police who kill black folks are no longer on the force because people are we're in the streets, right? Demanding that those mofos they gotta go, right? So that stuff that actually works, and I think it works. It also works when we're taking power in the streets, in our workplaces, and in the halls of City Hall, which we made some gains this past election, right? So what does it mean for us to go those traditional routes with the folks that are actually on our sides who came from our movements and be in the streets and put pressure on the people who we know damn well aren't for us and are against us?
I wanted to answer. Somebody else
I
was
was
going to do that too. I was going to answer. So to your question of what can students do, something that like students can do real easily, like today, like within the hour, is like if someone like something that just happened to me, just pulling up here, right? The university police officer like circled the block twice as I parked to just make sure like what's this guy doing? You know, it's 1999 Toyota Sienna parked on the corner of a church. I'm coming here. What am I gonna do? You know what I'm saying? Doing things you can do is like, hey, why are you stalking this one person? Even if you don't think they're stalking, hey, I noticed that you circled this block twice. Right. Kids are just now getting out of school. There's no danger here. What are you doing? You know what I'm saying? Oh, I'm just doing my regular beat. No, you're not. No. I just noticed that a black person just pulled up, and I have never seen you in this area. Now you're certainly like patrolling the block twice. Move along. Or
you taking up too much space.
Do something else. As simple as like I also noticed as I was walking, not just like one group of students, but like a sea of students like suddenly just diverge out of my way. Like I'm not the Pope. You can walk where you were going to walk. Walk. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to treat me like I'm the dog on the street. You know, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm here to come to a Reparations Summit and leave. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to.
Quite effectively.
I'm not an amoeba finna infect you with Ebola or something. Just do what you finna do, and I'm gonna do what I was finna do. And we can keep it moving. So
it's a mental illness, right?
Yeah, it's just simple stuff like that within the hour that you guys can do that like would, I mean, it would put the first step forward into what we want to ask from you guys. Just simple stuff like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna shout out a few organizations, student organizations that are doing some dope work and collaborating with community groups. I know there's a student youth organization that's focusing particularly on the community benefits agreement.
Yeah.
There's a student organization that's focusing on defunding the UCPD and allocating those funds back into the community. You know, there's a lot of, and Todd can speak to a few other organizations that have been, you know, doing collaborative work. So I will reach out to those groups and kind of get more involved with them and see what they're doing. And then see, you know, how can you hold them accountable to the community's needs? Because that's, you know, they should be getting behind community versus getting in front of community, and kind of being sort of a person that, you know, understands the difference between that, I think is key. Thank you.
And I was just gonna say, kind of similar to what these two just said, I think it could even be just as simple as making sure that you can identify those different issues that are affecting those communities, and educating your peers about it, and making sure that you're holding your university or making sure that you're holding this space accountable for what it is that they're doing. And that also includes maybe even an action or starting an action or holding people accountable without, you know, the affected group having to be there to monitor it. And that could be effective in its own way. Just because there are so little Black and brown people here. And if we're talking about reparations for Black people, then I feel all the students here need to make sure that they're also on that agenda with the university in which they attend. So it kind of has to start with kind of like you guys. So yeah, those are my take on things.
Yeah. I would add some things too. Each of us who attended this meeting, this summit today, is here because we felt drawn to this cause. Okay, we're all leaders. We need to accept that. We need to appreciate that, and we need to make sure that these meetings, in whatever space, they continue to happen. I should see, I mean, best case scenario, everybody in this room the next time I come to an event at which this topic is discussed. Okay. We know that life gets in the way. We also know that some people fall off. Some people maybe don't feel as compelled to, they don't feel the call to action. They're not drawn to act as much as other people are. But we can't have a fragmented approach to tackling these issues. It's not going to work. We still, unfortunately, I mean, I think we did more so in the past, we don't have an established, accepted, and prepared network that is on the same page. Fighting on a united front. We don't have that, as far as I can see. I could be wrong, okay? But just kind of in my day-to-day dealings or whatever, I don't see it, okay? But we people in this room, as well as some other people who aren't here right now, people we know, we can do something about that. As of right now, okay? Guy and I, we're friends, we've worked together, we're gonna continue to work together, and my phone died, but I'm gonna ask him, okay, what's that Facebook page real quick? So when my phone is charged up, I can go to it and go ahead and follow it, like it, whatever, and start getting involved, start making, and maintaining relationships with anyone else who's on that page, and not just stopping there. So some people don't like Facebook. I'm not going to do, Twitter or whatever. That's on me. But I can still somehow find out when we're going to get together again. Yeah, I'll step up and I'll be like, okay, I propose that we meet this place at this time. Okay, and just like that, because that's me stepping up and accepting the responsibility of being one of many leaders, a cadre of leaders. That's what we have right here. That's what we have right here. We need to keep that going. Before we do that, the other ideas, these best laid plans, schemes of mice and men, they're not going to bear the fruit. They're not going to bear the fruit. So let's, just like the sister was saying, community. Community. It's a principle of quantum. Okay, we have to honor that by putting it into action. That's the foundation right there.
Next question. Yes, actually. Yeah.
I was listening to a question guy from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Margaret Taylor Burroughs graduated from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. She founded the Saville Museum in her home. She founded the Southside Community Arts Center. There's a book that just came out on Northwestern University Press. It's called Southside Dreams. I want to check it out. Before she died, she was honored. It was Margaret Taylor Burroughs' Day in the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois. There was a benefit banquet and presentation at the Art Institute of Chicago. Margaret's not with us in the room. That woman was something else.
Oh yeah, she was in faculty of Chicago. I'm from Chicago, born and raised. I was raised on 61st and University, so this is actually my neighborhood. I've seen it since '88. So and that's just me. My family has been in Chicago and been here for a while, but Margaret Burroughs actually her legacy funded quite a few of the arts programs I was in that got me to this point. So thank you for speaking your name.
Dr. King came to Chicago in 1966. Eyes on the prize seat. All those that chanted mobs and stuff and went to Marquette Park. And they threw stones at him. He got hit in the head and stuff. He said, they asked him why he came to Chicago when the problem was in the South. He said, anytime you south the Canadian border, you're in the South of the United States. And he said the racism that he saw in Marquette Park in Chicago is worse than anything he ever saw in the South.
We forget that.
I just have one thing to tease out. You spoke towards the charisma and the spiritual aspect of reparations and everything that's going against the institution. At what point are we holding the church as well as the clergy accountable for reparations as well? Because the University of Chicago specifically has a theological school that's directly tied to a lot of really fucked up policies. So where does that start? Who do you go to? Because I mean, if that's, I don't know if that's something you all can answer, but leads on how to get the understanding of the spiritual as well as the labor that's attached to our histories align with each other. So.
Power peace.
I mean, historically, it starts with George Foreman. So George Foreman went after the churches, and he extracted, I want to say it's like $3-4 million from churches, from private institutions. And what you see what's happening in Georgetown right now, because Georgetown, the university, right, is unwilling to meet its obligations. What's happening is the descendants of enslaved peoples, the 272 enslaved peoples of Georgetown, they're saying it's the Jesuit institution. This was funded by another institution. It's a continuous entity, right, that owned slaves, sold slaves, started a university. That university might imagine itself as a separate entity with separate obligations, but that university, or the Jesuits have their own liabilities for this, right? And that's what that movement is moving towards now. They're making direct claims on the Jesuit order, right?
And this brings in an intercontinental conversation, which slows down the conversation of reparations. Because if you have to involve multiple governments, if you have to involve multiple countries, a state at a certain level, nobody wants that to happen because it unravels all of white supremacy in the society we live in. But there are things that we can do.
Delusional white supremacy.
Correct. There are things we could do locally that I think would cause for advocacy to happen without us having to be in these people's faces or attend their churches or go to their masses or whatever. I think there are other ways for us to articulate our problems to them.
And you can sidestep the state. If the state is moving slow, if the state is only offering these tiny little things that we can extract from them, they're subject to a whole different, just like the university is subject to a whole different set of pressures, right? These religious bodies, they have all of these moral, I teach in the South now, right? So I teach at Auburn University. And it's amazing that when I teach reparations to these largely white, largely conservative students, when I start talking religion to them, right? And I show them that, no, actually reparations is in the Bible. It is mandated in the Bible. And you show that to a Jesuit order, it says reparations are in the Bible. What are they going to say, right? That to me is, and they can push a button, right? In a way that formal democracies and all the messiness that it has to go through in terms of extracting something from the state, there's a lot there, and I love the people that are doing the work to do that, right? But when you think, this is my talk earlier was on the stateless reparations, right? The idea of thinking through reparations beyond these nation states to these other private institutions, universities, churches, multinational corporations. There are different, I think, faster ways to get to reparations through these entities rather than the long siege, right? Because I was talking about that as well. We need them both, right? It's not an either-or thing. You know, people working in one direction over here, another direction over here. So the fragmentation, to me, this is a coalition, right? And the idea is not everyone has to be doing exactly the same thing at the same time, right? We can be working in different angles, but always in solidarity, right? Always in a mechanism where we know what everyone is up to and supporting one another when the calls come and making sure that that happens, right? So we can have people working at the nation state level, but I agree with you, we need people also working in private institutions, right?
These are more immediate situations too. These are more immediate situations. So part of the work that we do, myself and a few organizations in Chicago, is we look for the immediate ways to change things. So more on a local level, more working with clergy, working with spiritual practitioners, working with educators, principals, the people that we have access to, right? Because everybody can't run to the congressman. Not everybody knows that pathway, not everyone knows how to do that. So in order to make people feel like they're still in use, which is the biggest part of reparations, people have to be utilized. They have to be felt like they are valued and a piece of the system that's dismantling. We just have to keep them active. So we've been designing tools, we've been designing phone trees for people to just call. If you got 2 hours on a Saturday, here, this is the work you can do. Here's a packet of the stuff that you can do to help us push reparations forward. I think that needs to be disseminated quicker across the United States, because at a local level it can only thrive for so long. But I agree, things are starting to line up and people are starting to intersect. But one of my biggest concerns is that as it becomes an intercontinental issue, it will become so difficult to tease apart all of the atrocities and tragedies between Chicago and Congo alone. So this is, I think it's important for us to just keep remembering our local state as we go further international.
If I can suggest a book for you, I don't know if you heard of this, it's called Ebony and Ivy by Craig Stephen Wilder. That would be a good, it talks about the legacy of institutions and, well, Ivy League institutions specifically, but really most of PWI institutions in America, and like their start, which is the journey to not only educate but Christianize, but how that was built on slave labor. Really everything was built on free slave labor. The whole Industrial Revolution was, but like, you know, that's a great book I would suggest.
Ebony and Ivory Leaf?
Ebony and Ivy.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah,
So one last point, in that same vein, another smaller, more localized place to start work is art institutions. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago. That's one of the biggest PWIs in the world. It has the largest collection, one of the largest collections of African artifacts, museum studies, research in the world. So for me to be in that space and be pushing back from within that system is another way, right? We have to start not only going to these places and taking up space and occupying these spaces, but we have to demand shit when we get there.
Like when we get back to art that they stole.
Oh,
we read an article about that recently.
Paris is about to set a new precedent for the entire world, and this is something that they learned from Chicagoans. So it's like we feed the zeitgeist, and it comes back to us. But we have to be able to continue to funnel this information and this energy between ourselves. It can't just be Chicago.
I just read about it.
So, we're done basically. But thank you so much, all of you, for participating. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And feel free to sort of mosey around and continue the conversation.
No, that's B-Ray.
Stuff.